May 12, 1945, Freeman Field, Indiana. The aircraft sat in the hangar like something pulled from a nightmare. Its fuselage gleamed under the harsh work lights, sleek and predatory. Wings swept back in a way that defied everything American engineers understood about bomber design. Captain James Holloway stood 20 feet away, coffee growing cold in his trembling hand, staring at the twin-engine pods slung beneath those impossible wings. He had flown B-17s over Germany for 18 months. He had watched friends burn. He had counted the seconds between flak bursts and prayed to mathematics and luck. But nothing in his war had prepared him for this. The Arado AR-234 Blitz, the world's first operational jet bomber. The Germans called it Lightning, and now Holloway understood why. Intelligence reports had whispered about it for months. A bomber that flew too high and too fast for Allied fighters to intercept, that appeared on reconnaissance photographs like a ghost, blurred at the edges, already gone. The RAF had tried to shoot one down over the Rhine in March. Their Spitfire pilots reported reaching maximum speed, engines screaming, only to watch the German jet pull away as if their aircraft were standing still. The bomber had simply vanished into cloud cover, untouchable, leaving only the contrails of its twin Junkers Jumo 004B turbojets streaming behind like chalk marks on heaven's blackboard. Colonel Richard Martz walked the length of the fuselage, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous hangar. His fingers traced the rivets along the nose section, feeling the precision of German engineering even in defeat. The Arado AR-234 had been captured intact at Sola airfield in Norway just 3 days after VE Day, along with its pilot, a Luftwaffe lieutenant named Heinrich Bauer, who had flown 37 reconnaissance missions over England and lived to tell about it. Bauer had surrendered without resistance, had even helped American soldiers push the aircraft into a transport plane. But when they asked him about the bomber's capabilities, something dark had crossed his face. He spoke one sentence in broken English that the translator wrote down verbatim. "You think you won because we stopped flying, but we stopped flying because there was nothing left to see." The technical team had been examining the R-234 for 72 hours straight. Every measurement confirmed what the intelligence analysts had feared. Maximum speed, 461 miles per hour at altitude, faster than any Allied bomber by more than 100 miles per hour. Service ceiling, 32,800 feet, higher than most fighters could effectively engage. Range, 1,013 miles with a 3,300-pound bomb load, enough to strike targets deep in Allied territory and return home. But the most disturbing discovery sat in the nose. A Patton PDS photo reconnaissance system that could map entire cities from above the range of anti-aircraft guns. The Germans had been photographing Allied positions with impunity, invisible to radar, too fast to intercept. Holloway climbed into the cockpit through the narrow entrance hatch. The seat still smelled of leather and sweat, human traces of the war that had just ended. Or had it? The instrument panel stretched before him in organized chaos. German lettering on every dial and gauge. Altitude indicator calibrated in meters. Airspeed in kilometers. But one detail stopped his breathing. The flight log, still clipped to the panel, showed Bauer's final mission. April 28, 1945. Departure 08:47 hours. Destination marked as Liverpool-Manchester corridor. Mission type listed as Aufklärung, reconnaissance. Bauer had been photographing British industrial targets 2 weeks before Germany surrendered, flying a jet bomber that Allied command insisted didn't pose a strategic threat because the war was already won. Major Sarah Chen, the lead intelligence analyst assigned to Operation Lusty, the Allied program to capture and evaluate German aviation technology, stood beside the starboard engine nacelle with a clipboard and a growing sense of dread. The Jumo Ur-04B turbojet represented a revolution in propulsion. Where American engines still relied on pistons and propellers, limited by mechanical friction and the physics of rotating mass, the Germans had created thrust from pure combustion. Air entered the front, compressed through 11 stages, mixed with fuel and ignited, then exploded out the back at temperatures exceeding 1400 degrees Fahrenheit. The engine transformed fuel directly into speed, bypassing centuries of mechanical limitation. Chen had studied the captured engine specifications for days, running calculations that kept her awake at night. If Germany had possessed the fuel and time to mass-produce these aircraft, if they had deployed even 50 R-234s over Allied airspace in 1944 instead of 1945, the outcome of strategic bombing campaigns could have shifted dramatically. The hangar lights suddenly flickered. Every engineer and technician looked up simultaneously, that universal human response to technological uncertainty. The light steadied, but in that moment of dimness, Holloway saw something in the cockpit he hadn't noticed before. Behind the pilot's seat, where the fuselage narrowed into darkness, something metallic caught the returning light. He squeezed past the instruments, flashlight beam cutting through shadow. His hand found cold metal, fingers tracing unfamiliar shapes. Not German. The stenciling on a metal box read in clear English, "Property of U.S. Army Air Forces Wright Field Technical Intelligence." The timestamp on the identification tag read March 15, 1945. 2 months before Germany surrendered. 8 weeks before this aircraft was supposedly captured in Norway. Holloway's flashlight shook as his hand trembled. The box had been installed in this German jet bomber while the war was still raging, which meant someone from American intelligence had accessed this aircraft while it was still operational in Luftwaffe service, which meant either the Germans had captured American equipment and installed it in their jet, or someone on the Allied side had been inside this bomber before it reached Norway. The hangar door burst open with a metallic scream that made everyone jump. Military police, 6 of them, moving with the practiced urgency of men following orders they didn't understand. The lieutenant leading them walked straight to Colonel Martz, handed him a sealed envelope marked with classification stamps Holloway had never seen before. Martz read the single page inside, his face draining of color. When he looked up at Holloway still visible in the cockpit, his eyes carried a warning that transcended rank and protocol. The colonel's voice cut through the sudden silence like a blade. "Everyone out. This aircraft is being transferred to Wright Field immediately under security protocol Black Shepherd. You will all sign documentation stating you observed nothing unusual about this aircraft beyond its standard Luftwaffe configuration." But as the MPs began clearing the hangar, as engineers packed their tools with confused glances, Holloway remained frozen in the cockpit, staring at that American equipment box hidden in a German jet bomber. His mind raced through impossible scenarios. The R-234 had been invisible to Allied radar, too fast to catch, capable of photographing any target with impunity. And someone from Wright Field had modified this specific aircraft 2 months before Germany surrendered. The implications crystallized with terrible clarity. What if this bomber had been flying missions for both sides? May 19, 1945. Wright Field, Ohio. The interrogation room smelled of stale cigarettes and fear. Lieutenant Heinrich Bauer sat across the metal table from Captain Holloway, his Luftwaffe uniform replaced by plain gray coveralls, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Between them lay a photograph, grainy, taken from high altitude, showing the Thames River snaking through London like a silver thread. The date stamp read March 22, 1945. Bauer had taken this photograph from 32,000 feet, flying his Arado R-234 over the heart of England, while Allied fighters scrambled uselessly below, their piston engines gasping for oxygen in the thin air where the jet bomber glided effortlessly. Holloway slid another photograph across the table. This one showed Wright Field itself, photographed from directly above, every hangar and runway visible in perfect detail. The resolution was impossible for German reconnaissance equipment. Bauer's hands began to shake. His voice came out as a whisper, barely audible above the hum of the ventilation system. "Where did you get this?" Major Chen sat in the corner, taking notes. She had been the one to develop the film found in the R-234's camera bay, the one who discovered that half the reconnaissance images were of German industrial targets, photographed from angles and altitudes that only the jet bomber could achieve. Something was terribly wrong with the official story of this aircraft's capture. Bauer's resistance crumbled. He pressed his palms against his eyes, shoulders shaking. When he spoke again, his English was clearer, as if exhaustion had burned away his need for pretense. "You want to know about Operation Silbervogel, the silver bird. That is what we called it, those of us who flew the missions they could never admit existed." The story emerged in fragments. In February 1945, as the Reich collapsed, a faction within German military intelligence had made contact with Allied command through neutral channels in Switzerland. They offered a devil's bargain: access to Germany's most advanced jet aircraft and its operational secrets in exchange for protection after the war. The Arado R-234 became the vehicle for this betrayal. Its speed and altitude made it invisible to German radar operators, just as it was invisible to Allied defenses. A jet bomber that could fly anywhere, photographing everything, accountable to no one. Bauer described his first mission for the Americans with mechanical precision. March 15, 1945. Departure from Rhine Airfield at 0634 hours. His official Luftwaffe orders directed him to photograph Allied troop concentrations near Cologne. But hidden in his navigation charts was a second set of coordinates: German oil refineries at Luna, tank production facilities at Kassel, V-2 rocket assembly plants buried in the Harz Mountains. He flew the mission alone, the twin Jumo 004B turbojets howling at maximum thrust, the bomber climbing through 30,000 feet, where the sky turned dark purple and the curvature of the earth became visible. The American equipment installed in his aircraft was a modified IFF transponder that transmitted encrypted signals identifying the R-234 as a friendly aircraft to select Allied radar stations. Without it, Bauer would have been shot down by his own handlers. With it, he became a phantom, a German pilot flying a Nazi jet bomber with American authorization, photographing targets for both sides while officially serving neither. He had flown 11 such missions before the war ended. Chen's voice cut through Bauer's confession with surgical precision. "The photographs we found in your aircraft, the ones of London, Liverpool, Manchester, those weren't authorized by American intelligence." Bauer's silence confirmed it. Holloway felt something cold settle in his stomach. The German pilot had been playing both sides, using the protection of his secret arrangement to conduct his own reconnaissance missions. The R-234 had given him power that transcended the dying Reich, the power to see everything, to go anywhere, to exist beyond the rules that bound other men to their fates. Colonel Martz entered the room without knocking, his face grim.
He carried a classified folder marked with red diagonal stripes and dropped it on the table hard enough for them all to flinch. Inside were reconnaissance photographs that made the blood drain from Holloway's face. Soviet tank divisions massing in Poland, photographed in April 1945. Stalin's military headquarters in Moscow, mapped in detail that suggested months of surveillance. Port facilities at Murmansk showing submarine construction that Allied intelligence had believed was impossible. Martz's voice was flat, drained of emotion. Bauer wasn't the only pilot. We've identified at least 6 Arado R-234s that were modified for dual-side reconnaissance. 2 are confirmed destroyed. 1 is in British custody at Farnborough. The other 3 are missing, last seen flying east toward Soviet-controlled territory in the final days of the war. The implications crystallized like ice in Holloway's mind. The Germans had created the perfect spy plane, and in the chaos of the Reich's collapse, some pilots had gone freelance. They had sold their services to the highest bidder, accumulating intelligence that made them more valuable alive than dead. And now, with Germany defeated and the wartime alliance already fracturing, those missing jet bombers represented a new kind of threat, a technological advantage that could shift the balance of power in the emerging Cold War. Bauer leaned back in his chair, something like a smile crossing his exhausted face. You want to know where they went? You want to know who they are working for now? You want to know what they have photographed? He paused, letting the weight of his knowledge settle over the room. I can tell you, but first you will tell me what happens to a man who betrayed everyone and somehow survived. Holloway glanced at the folder on the table, at the photographs of Soviet military installations that shouldn't exist. He thought about the 3 missing R-234s, flying somewhere in the shadows between nations. He thought about pilots who discovered that the most dangerous weapon wasn't the bomb you could drop, but the secret you could keep. Outside the interrogation room, the sound of jet engines being tested echoed across Wright Field. American engineers were already studying the captured technology, already imagining how to build their own untouchable reconnaissance aircraft. The future was being written in the roar of those turbojets, but the present remained hostage to secrets buried in the cockpits of missing German jets. Bauer's smile widened. There is one more thing you should know. The pilot who flew to Moscow, he was carrying more than photographs. He was carrying blueprints.
June 3, 1945. Classified location, southern Germany. The hangar had been hidden beneath a bombed-out aircraft factory near Munich that Allied reconnaissance had declared destroyed months earlier. Captain Holloway descended the concrete stairs behind Colonel Martz and a squad of Army Rangers, their flashlights cutting through darkness that smelled of fuel and earth. Bauer had given them the coordinates after 3 days of negotiation, after promises were made that Holloway suspected would never be kept. The German pilot had whispered a name that made Martz's face go white. Oberleutnant Klaus Richter, the finest jet pilot the Luftwaffe had ever produced. The underground facility opened into a cavern large enough to swallow a cathedral, and there, illuminated by the Rangers' lights, sat an Arado AR-234 that should not have existed. Its fuselage was painted matte black, every surface modified for night operations. The twin UMO 004B turbojets had been upgraded with experimental fuel injection systems that left scorch marks along the engine cowlings. But what stopped Holloway's breathing was the cargo bay. The bomber's belly had been retrofitted with custom storage compartments containing metal tubes filled with rolled documents, dozens of them, protected by waterproof seals. Major Chen moved past Holloway,
her flashlight beam dancing across the aircraft's surface. The Arado AR-234's navigation equipment included British-made instruments, American radio gear, and a Soviet-manufactured compass system. This aircraft had been modified to operate in any airspace, to communicate with any ground control, to belong to everyone and no one. A ranger sergeant emerged carrying a leather flight case. Inside, they found Richter's meticulously maintained records, mission logs dating back to November 1944. But these weren't standard Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights. The entries read like the diary of a man who had discovered terrible power. December 18, 1944. Photographed Peenemünde. German High Command lying to Hitler about weapons production. January 9, 1945. Flew over Yalta. Photographed Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin dividing Europe. February 23, 1945. Made contact with American intelligence. March 30, 1945. Made contact with Soviet intelligence. Holloway's hands trembled as he read. Richter had been playing all sides, accumulating secrets and using his untouchable jet bomber as leverage to survive the war's end. The Arado AR-234 had given him unique power. He could photograph anything, anywhere, and deliver that intelligence to whoever paid the most. He had become a freelance spy, flying the most advanced aircraft in the world, accountable to no government. Chen's voice cut through the darkness. "The documents in the cargo bay, they're not photographs." She had opened one of the metal tubes, spreading its contents across the bomber's wing. Technical drawings showing advanced jet engine designs that went far beyond the UMO 004B. Axial flow compressor configurations, afterburner systems, swept-wing aerodynamics that wouldn't appear in Western aircraft for another decade. At the bottom of each blueprint, copied from original, BMW Facility Munich, April 1945. The implications hit like a physical blow. Richter hadn't just been photographing military installations. He had been stealing the Third Reich's most advanced research, and according to Bauer's confession, Richter had successfully delivered copies to Soviet handlers in exchange for asylum. The pilot who had flown to Moscow had carried the blueprints for the next generation of jet aircraft, technology that would allow the Soviets to leapfrog Western aviation development. Martz opened Richter's final logbook entry, dated May 7, 1945. The handwriting was hurried, frantic. "Germany has surrendered. My usefulness to all sides is expiring. The Americans want me dead because I know about their atomic program. The Soviets want me dead because I know about their intelligence networks. The British want me dead because I photographed their post-war occupation plans. I have hidden copies of everything in 3 locations. If anything happens to me, these secrets will be released." Richter had written those words 16 days ago, and now his aircraft sat abandoned, empty of its pilot. The Rangers had swept the entire facility. No body, no signs of struggle. He had simply vanished, leaving behind his magnificent jet bomber and enough secrets to destabilize the fragile peace already cracking between the victorious Allies. Chen found the final document tucked into the pilot's seat, a single sheet with 3 sets of coordinates, locations where Richter had buried his intelligence archives. One pointed to the Bavarian Alps, another near the Swiss border. The third placed a cache in occupied Berlin, deep in the Soviet sector where American intelligence had no access. Martz stared at the coordinates, then at the black Arado AR-234 gleaming in the flashlight beams. His voice was barely a whisper. "He's still out there, watching, waiting to see who comes for these locations first." The colonel folded the paper carefully. "This aircraft never existed. This facility was empty when we arrived. Richter's name gets buried in a file that nobody will ever read. But Holloway knew it was already too late. Somewhere in the world were copies of everything Richter had photographed and stolen. The pilot had built himself an insurance policy from secrets, and that policy was still active. The 3 missing AR-234s that Bauer had mentioned were probably still flying, carrying different pilots with different agendas, all having learned the same lesson. In the new world being born from the ashes of the old, information was worth more than bombs. Holloway walked around the silent jet bomber one final time, running his hand along its sleek fuselage. The Arado AR-234 had been designed as a weapon, but it had become something far more dangerous. A tool for seeing everything, for going anywhere, for existing beyond the rules of conventional warfare. Richter and the other rogue pilots had understood what military planners were only beginning to grasp, that the future belonged not to the side with the biggest bombs, but to the side that could fly high enough and fast enough to see what the enemy was hiding. Outside the underground hangar, dawn was breaking over a Germany that no longer existed. The Third Reich had fallen, but its most advanced technology had escaped into the hands of men who recognized its true value. The war was over, but the age of the invisible spy had just begun, born in the cockpit of a German jet bomber that could outrun anything in the sky. Somewhere out there, Klaus Richter was still alive, still watching, still holding secrets that could change the world. The ghost in the sky had become a ghost among men, and the Cold War had found its first weapon, the truth that nobody wanted revealed.